Demonic possession.
One of the scariest topics in all of the paranormal. Today, on Speaking of Spirits, we're going to be discussing demonic possession, focusing on one specific case that you are very familiar with. All right. Welcome to Speaking of Spirits. We're glad you could join us today. Today we're going to be talking about a case for Roland Doe. What do we know about Roland? So let's take a couple minutes here and let's set the table, see what we are talking about. Roland Doe, also known as Robbie, is a pseudonym for a boy that was born about 1935 and who is claimed to have been the victim of demonic possession. Priests from the Roman Catholic Church were called in to perform a series of exorcisms on Robbie, and the events were recorded by priest Raymond J. Bishop. These recordings were used as the basis for William Peter Blately's novel and subsequent movie, The Exorcist. This is how most of you are familiar with this case, even if you don't know you're familiar with this case. So that's what we're talking about today on demonic possession. We're going to be focusing on this specific case with Robbie Doe. And we're going to be going over some interesting things here. Again, I always like to start with what do we know for sure? What are some of the facts? Robbie, again, he was born in 1935. The best case we can figure out is that the possessions were probably, the exorcisms were probably done about 1948. Somewhere in that window. Robbie actually lived in Cottage City, Maryland. Cottage City is just outside of Washington, D.C. It's in the state of Maryland, but it's within the Beltway that surrounds Washington, D.C., so kind of a suburb of Washington, D.C. So he was an only child, and the story goes, so he didn't have a lot of people to play with, so he was looking for people around the house for playmates and entertainment, and he ended up spending a lot of time with his Aunt Harriet. Aunt Harriet was a spiritualist, and some reports said she also was a self-proclaimed Christian, which is very strange to have somebody be a Christian and a spiritualist. That's an interesting combination. Yeah. So, anyway, Robbie was spending a lot of time with Aunt Harriet. As a spiritualist, Aunt Harriet introduced Robbie to the Ouija board, which is reported that he expressed interest in. So, and after, at a fairly young age in Robbie's life, Aunt Harriet died. And the lore is that Robbie then turned to the Ouija board to try to talk to Aunt Harriet, being somebody that was very important to him and a major figure in his life. When she passed away, he turned to the Ouija board to try to communicate with her. And the story is that instead of communicating with Aunt Harriet, at some point he brought in a demon, which started the series on the possessions.
Yeah, I thought this case was really interesting that the aunt showed him the Ouija board. Yes. And then he took it upon himself to try to contact her, right, after she passed.
Yes.
And I think the family also tried to they were somewhat involved with that as well. It wasn't just Robbie, from what I read. But there's inconsistencies in some of the stories. And, so you never know where the truth lies.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think the family also contacted a medium.
They did. What happened is, as far as I can understand, they scratches started showing up on Robbie's body.
Yeah.
And so they contacted a medium, and during while the medium was trying to communicate, well, let me back up here. I guess the scratches started showing up on Robbie's body, and the family just automatically assumed he was already possessed. So they called in a demon to try to communicate with.
They called in a demon?
Excuse me. They may have. They called in a medium. Excuse me. Let me back up and get the story.
Yeah.
So when these scratches started showing up on Robbie's body, the family just assumed he was possessed already. They called in a medium to try to communicate with the demon.
Yeah, yeah.
And when the medium started the seance, these scratches actually formed a word. And it formed the word Louis. And Robbie's mom, her hometown was St. Louis.
Yeah, it was interesting. And then I also read that, I think prior to the scratches showing up on Robbie, they were hearing scratches in the house.
They were
and
hearing.
They thought it was rodents, and they were like pulling up floorboards even to try to figure out where these rodents were. There's no rodents. Yeah. So kind of interesting.
It was kind of interesting because after Aunt Harriet died, they started hearing these noises in the house.
So it's probably the whole thing was started to be Aunt Harriet, and it just kind of spiraled. Yeah,
Aunt Harriet came back to say hi and was probably causing all these noises.
Yeah.
And the family was trying to figure out what it was. At the same time, Robbie's using a Ouija board to try to communicate with Aunt Harriet, and then everything just kind of went sideways after that. So,
yeah, in my looking on the story, the thing that I thought was probably the most interesting is it seems like in every instance where they tried to restrain, it was completely ineffective. The first time, if I remember the reading right, the priest was trying to do an exorcism, and he slipped his hand out of the restraint, grabbed a bed spring, and cut the priest with it. And it seemed like every time they tried to do that, poo-poo ensued.
Yeah, right?
It seems like the story on the whole is graphic, kind of like the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and so when they... So I guess what, the bishop... When did the bishop show up? First it was a priest, right? A Jesuit priest?
Yeah. Well...
And his name was Bishop.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got a hold of a bishop.
He got a hold of it. As I understand it, after the word Louis showed up on Robbie's body, they actually moved to St. Louis. Now, I didn't know if they just took Robbie and went to St. Louis, if the family moved. That part I don't know. But I think at least his mother, being from that area, took Robbie to St. Louis.
Yeah. Probably for more family support.
Yeah.
You know, we're going through this. This is pretty traumatic. We need help.
And when you got to, let me see. They ended up in St. Louis, which again, I'm not really sure how they got there.
Right.
And it's when they got to St. Louis when they contacted a medium to communicate with what they assumed was a demon that had possessed their child. And when they got to St. Louis, and so I got my facts confused a little bit earlier. When they got to St. Louis and the medium was doing the seance, then again, it looked like he was getting scratched, but this time it formed the words "no school."
I think we all want that, right?
Yeah, and I'm kind of thinking, geez, why didn't I think of that?
Right? I was like, Mom, look at this.
Look what the demon said.
Yeah.
So, yeah. The demon said I don't have to go to school.
That's right.
So, That part of the story I'm kind of like, yeah, right.
Yeah,
and again, I was like, geez, I wish I would have thought of that. That's, I got to give him props.
When no school, that's exactly what I thought. I thought this is all just a bunch of hooey.
Yeah, and one of the reviews of the case I did read is that during this entire time, nobody was ever like checking Robbie's nails or anything like that to see if he was scratching himself.
Well,
or doing something to.
Priest said that the scratches appeared under his clothing in their presence. So he wasn't doing that by himself.
Yes.
They checked him, I would assume they checked him before, and then started the exorcism, and then the scratches started appearing.
And after that incident, it was the medium who contacted Jesuit priest Raymond Bishop.
Okay.
To come in and look at it. So that's where Priest Bishop came in. And that's when the church got involved. And then he went to the Jesuit priest Bishop, then went to the Catholic Church, and the people started doing the exorcism.
Right.
So I've been watching a lot of documentaries on Netflix, and I'm not sure that's healthy. But I do it anyway. And it's amazing to me how it seems like from the 60s to the early 80s, it seems like there's a lot more belief. Like, I don't know how to say that differently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they didn't use their common sense. They didn't do, like, really strong investigations. They said it was so it was so. Yeah. I don't know how to say that differently.
No, I understand.
And, there's been 3 or 4 occasions where I screamed at the TV, like, look over there, silly.
Right.
And I often wonder if a lot of these stories whatever you want to say, pre-true crime documentary series come out on TV, if people just didn't have like a checklist to go through. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
But it sure seems like that in that time period, the time period where this happened, if you could get a creative so-and-so, he could get away with some stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
well, it was interesting because I think once they started performing the exorcism on Robbie, it wasn't working, obviously. Then he went to a psychiatric hospital, right?
Well,
or he was seen by a psychiatrist.
Yes.
And the psychiatrist was doing regular medicine on him, the traditional type of psychiatric care that you would get. And that wasn't working. So he came back to have the exorcisms done again. I mean, this poor kid went through like over 40 exorcisms. He
did. And that was one of the interesting things about this specific case is it went on for a period of time.
Months and months.
Months. Yeah. And there was multiple sessions of doing the exorcism. It wasn't just one. There was many of them that they did over a period of months.
In the Catholic's church hospital or something?
They did, yeah. When he was in St. Louis after he came back from the psychiatrist, they actually put him in the hospital.
Yeah. In
the Catholic hospital there in St. Louis.
And they were doing exorcisms in the hospital as well. I mean, this kid went through the ringer, and it just wasn't working. The more they did, it seems like the harder the possession took a hold.
Yeah. In fact, one of the interesting things I ran across, the Discovery Channel did a documentary on this, and one of the interesting things that I ran across is that one of the priests actually involved in the ceremony said that he believed that during their first exorcism is when the possession actually locked in.
Oh, interesting.
Oh.
That's when it really locked in. Up until then, it might have been like a jumping situation where you would jump into Robbie and then leave. But during that first exorcism, he felt like that's when it really locked in and stayed.
So it was just toying with them until then.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And during the exorcisms, they said that the crucifix on the wall would tremble, the bed would shake. And then I was watching yet another like debunking documentary on this, and they're like, yeah, but you can shake the bed. And how? Without you physically grabbing the mattress, and still how? I mean, he was like, what, 12?
Mm-hmm.
12-year-olds typically are not that strong, but still it would be obvious that you're grabbing the mattress and making it shake, you know what I mean? And that a glass of holy water exploded. I mean, what happened in front of the priest, it just shattered. It just...
Yeah,
and then
the reports of that, though, is that the bottle didn't just break, it shattered. It actually into many, many pieces.
Right. Yeah. And then I guess they decided at some point that he needed to be rebaptized or baptized because they didn't know if he was baptized. Mm-hmm. And so on the way to the baptism, the car crashed. I mean, there was some weird stuff going on there. Wow. So...
A lot of reports say that on the way to the baptism, he actually tried to crash the car.
Robbie did?
Yeah. Oh. He was grabbing the steering wheel trying to...
That's interesting.
Trying to move the car.
Huh.
So, now that's a couple of reports about that, is that he himself was actually involved in the crash, trying to create the crash.
There was another report that during the day, he seemed completely normal, and as night fell... is when he would be taken over. Like he transformed and into this, possessed kid. So that's kind of interesting too. I don't know, never been around a true possession before. I've been around people who think they're possessed, but it's usually drug induced. Yeah. Just saying. We do get calls on that, and then I have to follow up with what are you taking? Because I mean there are even drugs that are prescribed, not just, street drugs, but drugs that can alter mind activity. So I have to ask what they're on, and not being mean, but because sometimes you start mixing cocktails and things happen to our brains. So, but that's kind of interesting to me that he was normal as can be until night. And I think, how awful would that be to know every night that something's going to happen to you and then to slip away? Yeah.
Kind of along that particular thing where he was fine during the day and then at night is when a lot of the activity started. Another interesting thing is that when he was cured, the stories say he does not claim to have any memory at all of the entire few months.
Right. Like he lost the whole year of time.
It happened, yeah.
He has no recollection of any of the exorcisms, nothing. It was gone. So, and that, you wonder, you always kind of like, yeah, right, this kid was, but over 40 people witnessed either the exorcisms or prior to the exorcisms. I mean, that's a lot of people who, friends of the family members, people in the church, the clergy. There was a lot of people that saw this. So you'd say, okay, just one little tight unit, right? But when so many people saw it, but then again, when you sit there and think about it, how did they keep this so secret? Yeah. Having been in the service, like Mark and I have been, right? Mm-hmm. There are no secrets. And they say, loose lips sink ships. Well, that's true, because you can come up with a rumor in the Navy and at 8 o'clock in the morning, by 5 p.m. it's all the way around the base. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I got to wonder, if that many people truly did witness this, how did they keep their mouths shut and keep him anonymous in the family? Because they did not want fame. This was not a book deal or a movie deal they wanted. Because even this Roland or Robbie, we really don't know his name. There's suggestions as to what his real name is, but we really don't know. And he's never claimed any kind of notoriety from this. Nobody in the family. Yeah. And that's kind of amazing.
Well, I don't know if you'd want to stick that pin on your wall.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but think about the money involved.
That's true.
I mean, people have done far less for money.
That aspect of it is very interesting because, yes, there claims to be 40 witnesses, and yet getting information on it is very hard, particularly from the Catholic Church.
Right.
The Catholic Church itself has worked really hard to keep a lot of this information hidden.
And so most of this information came from one of the priest's diaries.
There was a priest who was actually recording a all of the activities. He kept a diary during it.
I tried to find that diary because usually by now somebody has scanned it and made it a PDF and it's out there. I have found a typed version, but I don't know if that's the real version. So I don't know if it's truly a diary that exists.
I have a feeling if it does exist, it's probably in the vault at the Vatican.
Probably.
With as tight as they have kept us. An interesting part of this was as tight as the church has tried to keep all this information. In 1949, there were numerous newspaper articles about this event.
Right.
And, I mean, they're not headline news. These were small articles buried, about page 12 of section B, whatever. But still, there were news articles in newspapers about this exorcism that occurred. And it didn't contain a lot of details, didn't contain any names. But it's just interesting that in something that they tried to keep so quiet actually ended up in the newspapers. And in fact, that's...
Like I said, there's no secrets.
Yeah. When William Blake went to write the book, The Exorcist, this is where he got a lot of his information was from these, or started his ideas was from these newspaper articles.
So you go back to the beginning of this, right? So he's with the Ouija board. And that's where something was invited in, or a doorway was open. And we tell people all the time, the Ouija board is not necessarily evil. It's a tool of communication like my dowsing rods. Anything can be a tool. But if you use it incorrectly, you can invite. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's say this demon shows up and he starts toying with the family, right? Because they heard squeaky shoes. They heard scratching. They would say, the family themselves were, not just Roland or Robbie was using the Ouija board. The family was, because they would say, if this is the aunt, knock 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. And they'd hear it. If this is really you, knock 4 times. Now, we do the same thing on investigations, right? Mm-hmm. Knock, 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 knock. So there was a call and a response going on here. But I don't think they were ever taught how to close the loop or to ensure it was her or to ask something only she would know. Things like that. So you can try to decipher who you're talking to. So then this thing starts growing in power. Right? Mm-hmm. What interests me, as somebody who's dealt in this field as long as we have, is that a medium, they think it's a demon, so they call in a medium to communicate with a demon. Who does that? I don't know of any mediums out there who would actually communicate with a demon. Do you, Mark?
I don't. Not today.
No. That fascinated me because I thought, I wonder if she's the one who really opened that door wide. Or he. Don't know. Because who does that? I mean, I wouldn't think that anybody, hey Fred, come on in over here and talk to me a little bit. I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
That's a good point. I think a lot of this we need to keep in, remember the time frame we're in. Too. We're in the late 40s. So I'm not really sure what the prevailing ideas were at the time about demonology, spirituality,
True.
What, where everybody is. That also comes into play with how much more we know now about psychology than we knew in the late 40s. So when he went to the psychologist, we got to keep in mind this is a psychologist with the information they had, and I'm assuming that was probably 47 or 48.
Right.
And...
Well, did this go on for over a number of years, or was it just 1 year?
You know what? I'm not really sure. I can't find... The only thing I can find is that Robbie was born around 1935. Or I found that in 1935. Mm-hmm. And the newspaper articles came out in 1949.
Because I have that he was cured in 1949.
Yeah.
So, interestingly enough, what I saw was that he was cured during a lightning storm.
It was in 1949, yes.
So, but during a lightning storm, why would they call that fact out? I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, the second half of that part of it probably explains the lightning storm. So I figured, now this did go on for quite a while. So I figured if he was cured in 1949, I'm going probably back to 1948 because they did the exorcism sessions for many months.
Yeah, they said he had 20 to 30 exorcisms at home before they even took him to the hospital.
Yeah.
That's got to be exhausting, not only for the child, but everybody involved.
Oh, that's exhausting for everybody. It's exhausting for the priest. It's exhausting for the family.
I can't imagine that.
Yeah. So I'm backing up. So probably 47, 46, somewhere in there.
Okay.
And again, this is just kind of an estimation just from what we do know. But if we know he was cured in 1949. That mm-hmm. seems to be locked in every version of the story that you hear. So you just kind of have to start from there and kind of work backwards.
Something else that I found interesting was that the family home in Maryland was destroyed. Mm-hmm. Somebody demolished it. And the family home in St. Louis was destroyed.
And the hospital was destroyed.
And the hospital wing where he was exorcised
mm-hmm.
was destroyed. Now that's bizarro.
So every building associated with this story has pretty much been...
Right. They boarded up his room in the hospital. They wouldn't allow anybody in it because...
The room they did the exorcism in
there
was locked.
I don't know if they were afraid of something reoccurring or they just... Let's just not even take the chance. But then they destroyed the whole wing of the hospital.
Well, like we were talking about, I guess every podcast, it all boils down to that energy thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can walk into rooms and know if something good or bad's there.
Yeah, definitely.
Going back to what we mentioned earlier, the story is that he was cured in 1949 during a lightning storm. The second half of that is that one of the priests that was involved in doing the exorcism at that point became possessed.
What? I had not read that.
Yeah. And so that priest was then kind of held into a room that they kind of isolated, and he spent the rest of his life in the hospital.
Oh my God, how awful.
Wow.
And yeah, that particular night, that Robbie was cured, that during the same lightning storm, one of the priests also became possessed.
Now, wasn't there some bizarre... I know... Okay, so the author wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
And then the book became the movie.
Yes.
And there was a bunch of weird occurrences on that movie set, too, in filming The Exorcist.
There was, but I don't know if there was... interesting kind of story on that. They had some weird things happening on the set while filming the movie.
Like a lot of people died.
Yeah.
People who were family members of the cast and crew died
mm-hmm.
during filming. I mean, it was something that if you were into statistics, it would probably be statistically impossible for the amount of people who died during making that movie.
Yeah. I don't know, though, if what happened on that particular set is much worse than a normal set for any movie.
Gosh, it just seemed like when I was reading through that today.
Yeah, I mean, they did have some stuff happen, and maybe you can look at it and say, wow, that was kind of... Yeah, they had some weird stuff happen. But was it more than a normal movie set over the time? Some of the things they did on that movie, when they filmed the movie, they kind of went to some really... I don't know if extreme is the right word, but they really focused on getting some reality in there, not just acting. And so I think that kind of led to a lot of interesting things. The actress that played the little girl, Linda Blair, when they did... There was one scene where they come into her room and she's just like in bed, but she's sitting up and laying down and sitting up and laying down really fast. And I guess when they filmed the movie, they had her on a machine that was helping her do this, and the machine kind of short-circuited, went out of control, whatever, and it actually ended up really hurting. I think actually at one point kind of breaking her back. God. Breaking one of the bones in her back.
And then,
So there was some weird things like that.
Yeah.
But you kind of look at that and say, okay, was it because they were doing this movie, or is it because they're using this technology that I don't know if they've ever used before?
sure. Well, I can see that. But
So,
it wasn't so much the injuries, but because the lady who played her mother also had a spinal injury during making the movie. But it was the amount of people who died.
yeah.
That's the thing. Is like mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and all these real close family people were all dying. I think it was like 7 people.
I just looked it up. It said 9.
9. There you go. Yeah, bizarro. I would like for somebody out there who listens to this, if you're a statistical person, how many people die in a normal movie set? I mean, family members. And how many people died in The Exorcist, making of The Exorcist? That's crazy.
Just seeing the actors out there, I'm sure not that many.
Yeah, there's kind of a thing. I mean, the real case of, Robbie Doe. When Blady took this information to write the book, he kind of exaggerated. He changed a lot of things. In the book and the movie, it got started by a possessed item that got sent to the child. In the movie, of course, it was a little girl, not a little boy.
Right.
There were some things, and I think a lot of the stuff that he did in the movie, again, just kind of imagination and, never worked, actually happened during any of the actual exorcisms.
In the movie, a demon appeared.
Yeah.
But there's no account of that from anything I read
No.
about Robbie.
And a lot of this was just kind of over the top. It was kind of like really, really overly dramatic theater, In one scene, this little girl who's possessed, her head turns all the way around, comes back and looks at the priest again.
I'm pretty sure I see
again,
little
that's
kids do that
just,
in Chuck E. Cheese.
yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I think that could be kind of common. But,
some things like that were just total written for dramatic effect, and not
Right.
in the real.
well, yeah, I mean,
Exorcism,
didn't
so.
it when it was nominated for an Academy Award? I don't know if it won, but it was like probably the first horror movie ever to make,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, to win the Oscars.
Because
so,
they were very, well, like I said, they were very serious about getting some realistic
yeah.
effects on that. I mean, they put a lot of energy into actually filming the movie and making it look as real as possible.
Wasn't it in the movie the priest found an artifact? It was an artifact from the demon itself. And he was in Egypt or something like that. And he found a piece of it. There was a statue of the demon.
It was a statue. It was sent to the child. If I remember the movie, it's been a while since I've seen the movie. If I remember it right, the child's father was an archaeologist.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
And
right.
was doing this dig over in Egypt and ran across this little artifact, which he thought was kind of cool. So he sent it to his daughter, and this artifact happened to be possessed. So that's what started the whole process.
And they don't ever name the demon in the first movie, but in the second movie, The Exorcist, they do.
Mm-hmm.
So, but for a child to speak Latin, who's never spoke Latin, who's never been taught Latin, I mean, where does that come from?
Mm-hmm.
But
then again, was that real? In the movie they did that.
No, he did.
He did.
He did.
Yeah.
And
in the real case, Robbie did that, but there was some question: was he speaking Latin or was he just parroting what he'd
words.
heard?
Right.
The Latin that the priest.
Because he was speaking curse words.
Yes.
In Latin, and I don't know that the priest would necessarily walk through the door and curse at him in Latin.
You never know.
Could
Yeah,
happen.
be.
But
You never know.
I didn't hear the thing about the curse word. I did run across something then that he did use a lot in the real case. We're talking about Robbie now when they were doing the exorcisms. He did use a lot of profanity and a lot of curse words that especially a child, in that age and time should not know. But then a lot of people now looking at it say this could be very, or could line up with somebody who was sexually molested at a young age.
Yeah, I read that too.
So, I mean, there could be a possibility there.
I would think that with the amount of people that viewed this, that are clergy or the psychiatrist and that staff, they would have called bullshit early on this if they truly thought it was bullshit. They would have said, all right, Robbie, knock it off. Come on, let's go get an ice cream cone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It just seems to me like there was enough people involved and things happening because objects moved and things going on every time they were trying to do an exorcism, that unless they saw fishing line on something, I mean, what else can you do but call it truthful? This is real when you're standing there watching this.
Well, that's the other thing. Another thing, taking the time frame into consideration. Back in the late 40s, they didn't have the plastic furniture that we have today.
Right.
I mean, beds were solid.
Solid, hardwood. And,
you took a lot of energy to move those things. And
right.
So
and they didn't have TV.
Yeah.
And they didn't have, they had radio, but this was not the kind of topic that was going to be on the radio. I mean, so where did they, if he was indeed faking this whole thing, where did he come up with this plan? Yeah,
he had to somehow get the information.
And that's pretty gutsy and ballsy of a little kid to pull it off in front of all of these, an archbishop, right? And all of these people, and keep it going. Yeah. And not, not crack up and get caught. I mean, I have to say, in my mind, I think it was a true possession without having, I can't, I've read some, people that question it and they think it's fake, but boy, there was a lot of people involved in watching and trying to help this kid that if he was faking it, I think he would have been called out on it.
Somebody would have noticed it. The other thing is, if you're going through this, but then your home is in Maryland and all of a sudden you're in St. Louis and you're pulled out of school away from your friends and your support group and you're going to a psychologist and you're coming back home and people are doing strange things around your bedroom at night. There comes a point where you're like, okay, people, this is just...
Yeah, I want to go home now.
Yeah.
With my buddies. Yeah, I just... So this boy, he was born when? 35?
35, yeah.
So he's 5 years older than my dad. I can't imagine my dad. And my dad was quite the prankster. But that time frame, that era, like you said, I can't imagine him even pulling something like this off. And he was really good at this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I can't imagine even him doing it at that young age.
Yeah. Well, especially back then, because they would do, when they did an exorcism, they would actually restrain people.
Yeah.
And in this case specifically, because he was acting out, and at one point he
wasn't he breaking
hit a
his
priest
restraints?
And broke his nose, and yeah. So this is stuff then that if you're trying to just pull a prank,
I don't think you'd want to hurt somebody.
Yeah. He cut the priest with that story where he pulled the spring bed.
But
out
how
of
do
the
you
mattress,
pull a spring out of a bed?
Again, that's some pretty.
You'd have to get in there and cut it beforehand. It takes planning. You know what I mean?
Or lots of strength.
A lot of strength, exactly. A real possession, where the body twists and all kinds of not just Hollyweird that I'm talking about here, but real possession where they talk about superhuman strength, and it breaks it breaks bones. So, and they don't. It's like they're broken, but they're still using the limb.
Yeah.
Now I don't know, other than high adrenaline, like in a war situation or life and death where you've got to move, that you're going to get up and walk on a broken leg, or so. To pull a bed spring out, that's crazy strong.
That is. And even if you put it in there before, let's say you noticed the spring was loose, so you set it up so you could just reach under down there and grab it. But still, even that, it took some planning and some forethought.
And how do you go from if it's true that he was normal during the day, how do you pull that off?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I go back and forth on, is how do you pull that off? And he's like 12.
Yeah. I have an 11-year-old in there, gonna be 12, and I'm just amazed at the stupidity. So I don't think it's possible.
You don't think he can pull it off?
No.
Be normal during the day and turn into this at night? Yeah, and have all this forth planning and thought process going on that you would need?
Nope.
Yeah.
So I think there was definitely something going on there because, because again, if this was a prank, at some point, you're going to be like, okay, people, this has gone far enough.
Well, and it makes sense then if true possession, and then the demon is vacated,
Mm-hmm.
he has no memory of it. There's nothing. He lost a year of time. He has no recollection of anything that happened to him, and it makes sense because he's not in his own mind during the possession.
Yeah.
So.
And that also seems to be a fairly common. People who do have incidents of possession do have loss of memory during that.
Any traumatic event.
They will not know what they've been doing.
Sure.
Where they are. So.
Right.
That kind of follows a pattern that's pretty consistent.
Yeah. Well, shifting gears. How many possessions do you think you've come across?
None.
None? You?
None.
I thought once that I had. There was a guy doing crazy things. Real crazy things. I was a firefighter. He finally passed out. Gave him Narcan. He was fine.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So, the rareness of this is huge, so it's kind of hard, I think, to put any perspective on it.
Right.
But I think that when it all boils down, exorcism is scary for all realms.
Yes.
It is.
One thing that we didn't talk about, which I thought was interesting. So, typically, when I've read about anybody who's been possessed, they're Catholic. This family was Protestant.
Oh.
So they were brought into the Catholic Church for help. And they had no knowledge of Catholic practices, any of this. Protestant is completely different, right? So the whole ceremonial exorcism, they wouldn't have had knowledge of. He wasn't raised in a Catholic household. He didn't know because exorcisms are very precise in the order that they do every word. And it's the ceremony of the exorcism, if you want to call it a ceremony, it's very precise. He would not have had knowledge of that. And I don't think it's something that, they don't have internet. It's not like something he can look it up. So, unless you were a very devout Catholic and you had some knowledge of exorcism to begin with, which most people probably didn't back then at all, then I thought that was a kind of an interesting twist on this case, is that they weren't even Catholic.
Yeah. Well, I'm not Catholic, but I don't think they go into exorcism at regular church meetings either.
No, they don't. In fact, before the Catholic Church does an exorcism now, they actually have an entire list of things they do. That is like the very last thing that they do. In fact, it's almost to the point where they will try to avoid doing an exorcism.
Yeah.
So they will try to prove or disprove, anything else first before they go to the exorcism. Now, in 1940s, I don't know if that was the policy of the church, but I know when they go to do one now, that is like the very last thing.
I wonder if it had a lot to do with this case.
What it was something that I did read about this, which was kind of interesting, is that when this movie was released in 1973, I think, 74, something like that, it drove people by the tens of thousands back to church. It scared them so much that they went back to church. The Catholic Church exploded membership right after this. And people were passing out in the movie theaters. They were fainting. Mm-hmm. One guy claimed to have hurt himself because of the movie. He tripped and fell, and the movie studio settled with him out of court. And I mean, it was people were so terrified because this was really one of the first. I mean, there was the Mars movies and all that kind of stuff, but this was real life events, and it scared people, terrified them.
It was a combination of it. This is one of the scariest things because this is an area that very few people know about.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons that I got into it is because very few people are willing to even talk about it.
Right.
And that was one of the reasons I started studying, demonology and exorcisms and things like that, to at least have some knowledge of this area, because it's something a lot of people don't, and a lot of it is the unknown. People are scared of it because they don't know it, they don't understand it, and a lot of people don't want to, so they go to people that understand it. But so that was part of it, is that that movie was successful because it dealt with a subject matter that a lot of people have a lot of fear of too, just because they don't understand it. Yeah. And then the reality, they put so much energy, as we mentioned a couple times, into making the movie as real as possible.
Right.
So it looked very real. It was believable.
The vomit and the head spinning, no.
Well, yeah, but I mean, for the technology they had at the time.
But and then the parody of the Exorcism movies that came out, where there was just the vomit fests going on.
Oh, yeah.
Those are pretty good.
Yeah. Those are
but, I think you're right. It's a terrifying topic for most people to even talk about. I know my ex-husband didn't even want us to discuss it.
Yeah.
He believed that if you talk about things, if you watch certain movies, it makes it happen in your life. I'm like, oh my, whatever. Yeah. So that's why he's an ex. Okay. So I'm just saying, but so I think that you're safe in talking about it. It's not going to happen. But it is true. I think people are afraid of it, terrified of it, of loss of control of your body and your mental faculties. Right. So who knows what you're capable of doing.
And it may all boil down to, Grandma said it was so. I guess it is. Got to go back to church.
That's a lot of it is just a person's belief. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where it is. You can watch movies and read books and things like that, but just watching movies and reading books, that's not going to do anything. It is to the level that you actually believe these things.
Well, that goes back to the family being Protestant, though.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't, I don't know that this wasn't even in their mind at first. But then they jumped pretty quick from noises in the house and scratches on his body to he's possessed. And I wonder, I would love to be able to talk to that family and say, how did you go from A to Z so quickly?
Yeah.
Because usually most people progress through these steps, but they did jump from scratches and noises in the house. And then when the scratches started on him, I'd be, like you said, checking his fingernails. Mm-hmm. Are the scratches somewhere where, he can get to his stomach? Are they on his back where he can't possibly reach it? Okay, who else is in the house? Mm-hmm. That kind of thing. I'd be stepping through this, 1, 2, 3, and they went, oh, yeah, he's scratched, he's possessed. Yeah. And that, to me, that was a little strange to read.
I think a lot of that comes back to Aunt Harriet. Because she was in the house, so she was a house member. She lived there. Mm. So her beliefs were she probably shared her beliefs with the entire family.
Yeah.
And being a spiritualist and a Christian, she was probably combining a lot of teachings from both schools. And yet, if she was in the house, then she was probably sharing those teachings and beliefs with everybody that lived there. So the family was probably going somewhat off of what Aunt Harriet had told them.
Is there possession in the LDS faith?
Sort of, kind of.
Sort of, kind of?
It's possible, but...
Because I've always thought it was strictly a Catholic belief.
Interesting. There is a saying in the field that no atheist has ever been possessed.
Oh.
Which is...
Well...
And, to this day, which...
Makes sense.
I don't know if that's 100% true, but of all the documented cases of anybody being possessed, it is somebody who has a very deep religious faith, almost always Catholic. Not 100%, but usually in the Catholic faith.
There's quite a few possession stories in the Bible. So if you use the King James Version of the Bible as part of your curriculum, it's there.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's true. I've never met an atheist who was possessed, but then I've never met anybody who was possessed that didn't have a drug-induced issue going on with it, whether recreational or prescribed.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been sitting here trying to think of the word for however long this podcast has been going.
Right.
So in the 20s, seances, the word I was looking for, was a really big deal.
Right.
Right? So you think any of that had to do with this happening with the 40s and the medium?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it specifically said that when they brought the medium in to try to communicate with whatever had taken over their son, that she did a seance.
Seance. Yeah, it specifically
because
called
I
that
think at that time that was the kind of like the generally accepted way of doing any type of spiritual.
Yeah, the old table shakers.
Yeah, my mom performed a lot of seances over her life, and was either performed or helped the lead psychic to help with the seances, and they always had a method of closing that loop at the end, and I can't for the life of me remember what they did specifically because I sat in on a lot of them, but it was a method of closing the door, saying goodbye to everybody, and making sure that everybody was good to go. Because she did. My mom was raised Catholic, but she left Catholicism when she was 16. She was like done, and it's interesting to me that the seances. It wasn't just the Ouija board; it was the seance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good theory you had. Did the seance itself
call it in?
Bring something?
Well, and I've always wondered, me, Tim, if the folks who did the seances did everything they could to leave things open, because that's how they got their money.
True. I think most seances were entertainment.
Yeah.
It wasn't real.
Right.
None of it was real. I think a lot of it was staged. And I think if something really happened to most people who did seances, it scared the hell out of them because they're not prepared for real.
Right.
But so you think the noises and the knocks and the scratches in the house was Aunt Harriet first?
Mm-hmm.
And then the psychic or the medium is the one who brought in the demon?
I think at some point I think we've definitely got two different things here. I think the original noises that the family heard probably was Aunt Harriet.
Okay.
And then somewhere along the line, something else came in.
Yeah. So this kind of happened a little bit just recently with the case, right? We went into an investigation and had we identified who we thought the haunting was from. People, family members, and an outside member. But then people using a tool of communication brought in something else. Mm-hmm. And unbeknownst to them, the fourth thing arrived. And it took the families strong. Like you said, you don't ask something to leave, you order it to leave you alone. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, it left. Thankfully, it left. And it didn't go past that. But if the bumps in the night, I'm the oddball. I think all of us are in this room. That when there's something that goes bumps in the night, I get up and I go look for it. I'm all excited because I want more to happen.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, this is cool. Can you do this? But most people are scared to death of the bump in the night.
Well, good story. Yesterday I was in my house doing something, and I got a text from Matt, and he said that he was just sitting in the studio, and the banjo plucked hard. It was a long, strong note.
Huh?
And it took me all of 2 seconds to get out here and see if I could figure something out.
Yeah, exactly. We run towards it.
Who's here? What you doing, man?
Yeah. Can you play this song?
I have noticed that whenever the darker something gets, the more energy I get. I don't get scared. I get energy. I get stronger. I get more excited. So I don't know why that is. If anybody's got any ideas, let me know, because I have no clue what that is. But the darker something gets, the more energized I get off of it.
Do you think it's adrenaline? Like adrenaline? Like you're...
No, this isn't just adrenaline. This is like a spiritual energy. Like it feeds me. Like I get very, very strong, very powerful from it. So yeah, I get more energy. I get excited. I get, almost happy.
When it's stoked. Dark.
Yeah, the darker it gets, the better, the more energy I get.
I'm kind of the opposite. I'm not distinguishing light and dark, but for me, the more intense an investigation is, the more drained I am at the end of it. I mean, it just takes every ounce of my energy to get through it.
I think it's a lot on the personality, because I get more defensive than anything. So
I've also noticed the last couple of years, whenever I show up, if there is something on there, they either tend to hide or get really belligerent and start talking a lot of trash.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great audio?
So, yeah, as soon as I show up, they're like, you can't make me move, I'm not leaving. I haven't even got there yet, dude. Just I'm not making anybody do anything right now.
That's interesting. Well, I think this was a super topic. I think almost everybody's going to be familiar with at least The Exorcist, the movie. And I'd invite all of you to go read a little bit on it, because it's fascinating. And I had some projects I was supposed to get done around the house today, and I didn't get anything done because I kept clicking more and more buttons on the computer, because it kept leading me to more and more stories on this about the cast, the crew, even in the movie, and just, everybody's kind of interpretation of what happened. And I'd sure love to get the real written record.
Yeah.
PDF scanned. You know what I mean?
A lot of people would. I would like to get it just because, well, for me, it probably contains a ton of information.
Exactly.
Well, the Pope seems like a nice guy. Maybe we should write him a letter.
Shoot him an email and see if he
Is that Pope.com?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Something I wanted to throw out that I just actually very recently learned just this last week, dealing with possessions in general, is that possessions are not always demonic. And I ran across a case where it was a ghost, and again, for me, a ghost being defined as the spirit or energy of somebody who used to be humanoid, had passed away. And they were not happy that they had passed away. And they really thought that they could come back to life. And so they were actually trying to destroy a person, thinking that when the body died, that spirit would leave and they could take over that body.
Interesting.
And that's the first time I've heard of that from a ghost type entity.
So is that like, I think Amy Allen has coined the term being jumped.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I like Amy. She's my fave.
I do. I like her a lot. I think she's brilliant in this field.
In fact, actually, Amy's the one who told me that. That's where I was watching one of her episodes, and that's where I got that from.
No, okay, that's
and that just sent off like 4,000 alarms in me. I'm like, whoa, that is so cool, because that is like this ton of information that kind of shifts a lot of stuff. It explains a lot of things, because I never could understand why would one of these dark ones possess a human. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And the traditional thinking, well, they want to destroy them. Well, but why? You know, if you want to destroy something, you've got a reason why. But I couldn't understand why a demon would do that, because it doesn't make any sense to me.
I'm sitting here thinking, though, but once the human is dead, the human is dead.
Once the human is dead, but see, now this brings up a whole bunch of and again, this is something I'm brand new to.
I mean, the person they're trying to possess.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the idea was that when the person they were trying to possess, the idea was that if they temporarily killed the physical body or maybe did something to harm it, then that spirit would leave, and then the other spirit thought it could take over the body. Now,
so your spirit just vanishes from a living body, is what they...
Well, it leaves the body.
Because it's being pushed out.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the one that was already dead was going to take over that body.
So, talking about that, and we've had these discussions privately, we haven't done a podcast on it yet, about people who are diagnosed and labeled as psychotic or whatever, schizophrenic or whatever in the medical field. So, if somebody's spirit is vacated because this other dark spirit's going to enter the body, that person would be automatically labeled. I would think that everybody who knew this person say, whoa, that's not this person anymore. Mm-hmm. What's going on here? And they'd be institutionalized pretty damn quick.
Moved to St. Louis.
Yeah, exactly.
St. Louis?
To St. Louis. So, I mean, that...
But, I mean, we bring people back all the time. You know, there are people that die either in an operating room, in an accident.
So I've been brought back twice.
Yeah. You know, for whatever reason.
And I'm never brought back with money. Like, as a millionaire, I'm always brought back to broke Colleen. Damn it.
Well, you need to fix that.
I know, right?
But, and I think that's what now whether they're right or wrong,
Oh, they're thinking that maybe
know.
they're in that transitional period where you're laying there, you're flatlined, but maybe you still have possession of your soul.
So the person that was already dead, the ghost, was thinking that if they could kill this living person during that intermediate time,
right,
then the first spirit would leave and this ghost could take over the body.
Yeah, very interesting.
And then with our medical that we have now, we bring people back all the time. So
and
during
then they're brought
that,
back and then...
Yeah, during that intermediate time there.
Yeah, but you would still not even be you anymore. It would be obvious.
Well, yeah.
The traits, everything would be different.
But
right?
the
Imagine if you were that different, like your eye color even changed.
You
know what I mean?
Yeah, but the thing is that this ghost was so mad that they were dead. They were not ready to die.
Yeah.
They wanted to keep living.
Right, but I mean, say that really happened.
So they came up with this plan to try to take over a physical body.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept.
It's an interesting concept, but it also brings up then that a case of possession may not be a demonic entity.
A dead human.
A dead humanoid, yes.
We have to come up with a word.
Well, I can rest assured if I do that to somebody when I die, she's going to be built like crazy. She's not going to be me.
And rich.
Rich. She's going to live in Malibu. She's going to have like the Barbie dream house. Just put that out there. So...
Pink convertible and everything.
That's right. Doggone it. Better be careful when I die out there, all you Barbies.
Yes. So, anyway, that was just an interesting thing that I've ran across. Dealing with possession is not always a demonic entity.
Yeah.
So just to further complicate the system, let's just do that.
Yeah,
so I'll just throw that out there.
Well, I think
giving people something to think about.
That everything we've talked about as a whole, it's my belief that you have the ultimate say in you. Mm-hmm. And so exorcism is very interesting. You can go down lots and lots of rabbit holes. If the person listening to this podcast think that they need help, by golly, there's help out there. But as far as I'm concerned, you have power over you. Be assertive. Order things. things listen.
Yeah, that this happened to a child is where...
Yeah.
That, you know what I mean? Because children don't know that they have power yet.
Traditionally, though, dark entities will take on the weakest person they can find.
Yeah.
And not physically weak, we're talking spiritually weak, mentally weak. And a lot of times that is a teenager because they haven't developed their power yet.
Right. So like Tim said, there's people out there listening to this and they feel like they've gone down into that dark tunnel and they don't know what's happening. Reach out to somebody and get some help, whether it's a paranormal team, your clergy, somebody who can help you. So, yep.
Very well. I think that's it. Yeah, for sure. If you think you've got something going on, reach out, get some help to somebody. All right. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. We had a great time. We hope you enjoyed it. We will catch you on the next version of Speaking of Spirits.